Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Star, and welcome to another episode of Man Speak. And before I start, it is 5 a.m. in the morning here, so excuse me if I am a little bleary-eyed, but I have had coffee, so am wide awake. So Man Speak is an offshoot to our Heart Warrior series where some of our Heart Warriors come back and they have a whole other episode chatting to me about a subject that they're particularly passionate about, embodied in, and full of wisdom. They're able to have a great conversation. Now, today I'm thrilled and honored to welcome back our Heart Warrior number 62, and that is Chris Bale. Now, Chris is a master energy coach worker, and he is a mentor and also an intimacy coach. So, and if you go back to our first episode, we had a fascinating conversation and we opened up the conversation about semen retention. So, Chris has come back today, and the topic that he has chosen is healthy semen retention, deep healing, and union. So, really excited to be expanding on this subject. Now, Chris, on his website, he does have a blog about it, and he says that in that blog that he is sharing on a topic that has been a major focus point of his life's work for well over a decade, long before he began guiding others through endless experimentation, testing, resulting in mistakes and discoveries. It feels necessary to share some of these discoveries with us in the hopes that it can continue to shift the narrative further out of slumber and into empowered awareness. So I have lots of questions for him. Hopefully, obviously, me being a woman, I really hope I can do this subject justice. I'm sure that with Chris's information, he will be leading the way. So thank you for being here and enjoy. Hello, Chris Bale. How lovely to have you back. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good, Gemma Star. How are you doing today? Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, really well. Thank you. So this is a really important topic, and I know a lot of men, well, my understanding is that there is a growing awareness around it, and obviously from the title of healthy semen retention as opposed to unhealthy semen retention, there's a lot of details to be understood. And through your embodied experience, I'm really happy to have this conversation for the men out there. I'd like to start with in your blog on your website, you said that as men, we have been perverted, distorted, and disempowered in relation to our sex. Men have been brainwashed into chasing its quick release. Can you please give us a snapshot of society and how this is happening?
Well, most men as young boys are introed into sex through pornography, which is, generally speaking, completely set up and driven towards getting a man's attention and also getting him hooked in this pattern of visual stimulation, where he's really being overstimulated visually. He's being brainwashed into being attracted to certain versions of what femininity is being depicted as. But generally speaking, there's nothing accurate about how a woman is portrayed in pornography. If you were to move into the real world and actually move into deep connection and intimacy and embodiment, it doesn't look like that. It doesn't sound like that. It doesn't feel like that. All of this is being created in order to, the way that I look at it, sap life force from men and keep us kind of stupid, to keep us blind, to keep us deficient, to keep us distracted. And they succeed greatly at that, because our drive as men sexually, our biological drive, what we respond to, is very easy to manipulate if a man's level of consciousness is at a standard level of listen to everyone, don't trust yourself, you are worthless, you are not good enough, be better, be stronger, be more masculine, be more manly. You know, there's so much projection that's happening onto men. So the reason this quick release is happening is because this whole society and our societies are driven towards doing that, to taking from us, to stealing from us. And it's not just men. You can look at that in social media, right? How it catches people, how it creates such a deep level of addiction in us that has become so normalized that now the people in charge, or the authority figures, or the parents, they themselves are addicted. But it's so normalized, no one sees it as a problem. So that's when something gets really insidious, is when it becomes so normalized that now no one is able to even see it anymore. And I feel that as men, our relationship towards sex, towards desire, towards our ejaculation, and what sex even means to most men, is not empowering in the slightest. And this is also something that really affects intimate partnerships and how men connect with women, and how women feel within how a man approaches her sexually and intimately. By a raise of hands, if there was 100 women here, I presume 100 of them would all raise their hand in the experience of feeling used sexually, right? Used to get off so the man can ejaculate, because she can feel that he's there with her, but he's not actually there with her. He's just doing stuff to her, inside of her, in order to get to a specific conclusion. And I don't share this to demonize men. I love men. We are beautiful, powerful creatures, but we have been mishandled very deeply, and we've been confused. And men don't show up this way because he's bad. He shows up this way because he's never been shown any other way. He's never been educated or guided by an elder or by another man in his life who has walked that path, where the man can actually start to sit in his desire, sit in his arousal, sit in all the proclivities and the tendencies and the addictions that may come up in him. So it's not his fault. It's not our fault. We're just being dealt a really unfair hand. And it affects everybody.
Yeah, oh, I love that, Chris. Such a beautiful insight for us women to hear that as well. So in your experience, what is it then that brings men, what's the catalyst that they start exploring semen retention?
There can be many catalysts for it. Whatever it is great on my watch. Whatever has him, be aware that there's another way to do this. But often what I see is the man getting to a point in his sexual life, in his relationship with his own sexuality, with his experiences with women, where he's starting to feel deeply unfulfilled. And there's a part of him that starts to wake up in that suffering. It may not have any details, but there's definitely a seeking that starts. There's a deep knowing in us, I believe, that it shouldn't just be that, right? Sex is not just that. It's not just ejaculation. There's more to that. And I feel more and more men are waking up to that experience due to the suffering of chasing and moving towards what his primal body is asking him to move towards, and then feeling his spiritual body and even his physical body after the experience of excessively moving into ejaculation to release. There can be quite a crash or a deficiency after that for a lot of men. And it doesn't really create space for connection and intimacy. So I feel like that is something that wakes men up to it. And also the other thing that wakes men up to it is we are attracted to power as men naturally. Now there's dysfunctional versions of power, which we see endlessly on the planet. And then there are conscious versions of power that can really be here as service and protection and clarity and consciousness. And the semen retention piece, because it's kind of becoming more of a trend in men's developmental work, one of the promises is more power. So that'll wake up man's attention up. And he's like, oh, more power. That feels good. So then it depends on what school of thought he's moving towards, who's the teacher he's listening to, right? What are the practices that he's been given? Because more often than not, I actually see semen retention and the practice of semen retention creating a whole host of other problems in men. Extra tension, more disconnection, more fear, more control mechanisms, more self-shaming, more guilt if he does release and ejaculate by mistake. There's a lot of neurosis that it can start to bring up. So I really feel, from doing this work for as long as I've been doing it and exploring it, it's so crucial as to how he's approaching it, and the compassion, the patience, the love of self that he has alongside that, combined with discipline and structure.
Yeah, it sounds like such an incredible journey on all levels, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. So where does a beginner start? What are the most important things that someone that's embarking on this journey needs to know?
Firstly, to ask himself some questions. The first question that could be of benefit is, why am I interested in this? To begin with, what is the thing that's spurring me? Because oftentimes we feel feelings, but we don't acknowledge them, but we don't understand them. We just kind of follow them. But if the man is wanting to shift one of the ways that he's maybe been in sex for his entire life up to this point, that's pretty substantial. That's significant. So I want to know why. Why is that shift here? Why is that interest present? The second question that I would encourage him to ask himself is, and I ask all men that I work with and support through this process one-on-one, I have them ask themselves the question, what is sex to me if ejaculation is never a part of it? Now, what is sex? What does sex mean? What's the function of it? Why would I even want to have it if I'm aware that ejaculation has been removed? Would you want to have the type of sex that you've been having if ejaculation was removed? Because that can be the most challenging part for a man, when he begins to retain or not release all the time. Now sex has to become a very, very different thing, where his goal or his mission or his intention in sex, he has to find a new landing spot in that. Because before, maybe it was to feel pleasure, hopefully maybe have her orgasm once or twice, and then once I've seen she's done that, then I can allow myself to come. And that's kind of what sex is. For a lot of men, it was what sex was for me many years ago, before I had woken up to this aspect, right? It was very systematic. It was very goal-orientated. So when we remove ejaculation, well, now what's the foundation? What are you stepping into? And I encourage men to have the intention, be, how deeply can I be with myself and with this woman, with this person I love? How deeply can I just be here and feel everything that wants to arise? What would that look like? Now, that may be terrifying for a man who has based his entire male ego on his ability to have sex fast and hard and strongly. Well, now he's just kind of still. So he'll have to potentially feel all of his own egoic stuff come up, all his insecurities, all his feelings of not being powerful and not being worthy. And there can be a lot of stuff that comes up in the face of a man shifting how he's approaching sex, how he's approaching woman. And this is where the medicine for us begins.
Wow, so good. Okay, so what are the what's the step-by-step guide for entering this? Do they like set a goal? Do they have a certain time period? Do they build it up incrementally? What would you advise men who are ready to start this incredible journey?
To begin the process very, very slowly. He cannot expect to retain himself and continue to have sex the way that he's been having sex up to this point, because the way that he's been having sex up to this point has been in support of him releasing himself. So the first step, if we want to look at it that way, is before he even makes contact with her intimately, is to first have a process or a period of time where he can start to bring all of his feeling awareness into his own body. So he can start to feel himself somatically, physically, emotionally, energetically, where he can start to slow his nervous system down based on his ability to relax into himself. And even before that, I would go to say to bring this to his own self-pleasure practice first, because it will be a lot easier for him to start this just with himself. Because as soon as a polarity comes into the space, there's a whole lot more energy that can be overwhelming for him. So to really start to get to know his energetic sexual waves, how pleasure feels in his body when he's not chasing it. And I share with men to just very simply lay down, be very present in your body, to feel your body, and to be very present in your hands as you're touching yourself, as he's engaging with his genitals, and to not engage with his genitals in a way that, you know, he may masturbate, creating a lot of friction in order to ejaculate, but just being very loving with that part of his body, being very sensitive, being very gentle with that part of his body, without any goal to ejaculate, even without any goal to have an erection. He doesn't even need to have that. This is about mending the dysfunction, the distortion, the perversion, the sense of disempowerment that has been programmed into our relationship with our genitals as men. He wants to move fast and release fast because he's known since he's been a young boy that it's not okay for him to be there. Your genitals are dirty, they're bad, they're inappropriate. So do it behind closed doors, make no noise, tell no one, and forget it ever happened. How the fuck are you supposed to have a loving relationship with yourself when you hate such a fundamental part of yourself, or you feel such shame around it? So semen retention is just a practice. It's just a mode for approaching the deeper part of this, which is, can you love your nature as a man? Can you love your nature by supporting the accumulation of it in your system, where you don't need to release yourself or have like a little death in a moment in order to relieve your stress? Because we're just running from ourselves. We're running from feeling what we have to feel in order to know thyself. And it's a beautiful tool for a man to feel more of himself than he's ever felt before, and then to learn how to open to himself. So step one, be in your body, lay down, feel, breathe, sound, move, touch, no goal to ejaculate, and just start to experience your own waves of sexual energy that come through your body. Initially, maybe he's numb. Maybe he starts to touch himself, and because of the years of the friction and the disconnection, maybe he feels nothing. Okay, can you be with that? Can you love and honor and respect yourself enough to not rush yourself? So I'm calling him to stay there with his numbness and to be very sweet with his numbness and to allow every piece of his numbness to be present. Can he still feel the power in himself in spite of his numbness? Maybe the numbness is just another part of his power. Maybe it's the part of him that has revolted and that is shut down to the way that he's been engaging with himself and other people. Maybe that's a blessing. Maybe that's a gift. Maybe that's for him to discover with his own body. But the reason I see and we see men carry out certain behaviors of manipulation and abuse is because he hates himself first. You can't love yourself and hate the world. So it's got to start with his relationship with himself. And as men, our sexuality, our genitals, that whole area for us is so deeply important in order for us to get to our heart, to be in our love, to be open, to be compassionate. We have to feel full in this area, alive in this area, to have a sense of self. So broken men break things. Yeah, but if he's full, if he brings himself love every day through his hands, through his breath, through his devotion to feeling himself and allowing himself be what he's come here to be, then that will make and support the process of his retaining far easier. And I shared this in the semen retention course that's on my website. One of the things that I've said over and over and over again is it's very hard to retain yourself if you hate yourself, right? Because you're just going to keep feeling more of you, the thing that you've been taught to hate and to ignore. And a lot of men think that we can bypass that. Like, oh, I can build up my power and my potency and my consciousness, but I don't have to feel the things that I'm uncomfortable with. Bullshit. All of that is going to come right up to meet you as soon as the essence of you starts to accumulate and swell up. And that's beautiful. That's what's needed. That's what's necessary. So the harder it is for a man to retain when he's in intimacy, all that's speaking to is his relationship with himself. If a man is ejaculating immediately, that is his relationship with himself and his body. It's just a magnifying glass for that. he starts to become overwhelmed by himself. So staying in the body, feeling, breathing, allowing his expression and his sound, and slowing everything down. We were sold the image through porn that to be dynamite lovers, that we have to go hard and fast and be rough, and that's what women also say they want. Of course, that's what she says she wants, because she's also known, right? She's also been mishandled and disconnected from, and she's been taught sex through an experience with men and young boys who have learned sex through porn. So it's this looping frequency that keeps going, right? And women rush themselves, so then she never gets to feel her own femininity. Like, it's a pervasive frequency that is moving through both sides. But once someone goes first, whether it's the man or the woman, it will support deeper self-love, deeper compassion, deeper connection, mind-blowing orgasmicness for both people involved, far more than they would have ever experienced through peak experiences. I know I'm veering a little bit here, but I'm going to stop in this moment to see what direction you'd like to go in.
Well, I'm wondering and presuming, there's two sort of, possible directions here. There's the men who are single, who are not in an intimate relationship. So, their path is different from maybe someone who is in an intimate relationship, who's sleeping in the same bed as a woman every night, and obviously, different, feeling different, a different level of closeness to the feminine at that time. So do we need to distinguish these two paths? Shall we focus on men who are single at the moment? And what do you suggest? Do you suggest is this the same time they stop watching porn? And do they set, when they start, do they, for example, go a day and then maybe 2 days, or do they just go for as long as they can before they, allow themselves to release? What would you suggest?
So the first part of that question, single versus in a partnership or in a relationship, the man could be in a room full of 150,000 people, he's still single.
Yeah.
He could have 150,000 partners, he's still single. He could be in the bed next to someone, he's still single. He's still his own experience. In terms of practice, yes, there's obviously certain things that a man who is in relationship can begin to experience and practice through with his partner, versus a man who is, let's say, not in intimate relationship, and that's not his choice. He'd like to be, but he's unable to be in that space in this moment. It's still the same, ultimately, where his experience in his life in relation to everyone is a direct reflection of his experience in relation to himself internally. All of his orgasmicness and his sexual energy and his bliss as a man has nothing to do with the woman beside him. Because in order to feel that in her presence, he has to have access to that in himself. She can never make him have access to himself. She can never cultivate presence in him for him. That's all on him. So his depth of feeling within his relationship to his partner, or to a woman, is directly in relation to what he feels when he's with himself alone. I would say both men in both situations should be prioritizing learning to touch himself in a new way. I was very surprised in my process when I woke up to the fact that the way that I was touching my genitals and engaging with myself sexually as a man, everything I was doing and how I was touching myself, I was closing myself. I was numbing myself to me. And I remember the first time I started to actually engage with myself in a loving, sensitive, receiving type of manner, it opened so much unexpressed trauma and sadness in me that I had no contact with prior to that. I literally remember shaking the first time I was engaging with myself in that way because it felt so wrong. I didn't feel like I deserved it. I didn't feel like I was allowed to not perform. Right? So all the shame, so what's that shame about? What's that fear about? The fear of not having an erection, right? Like the level of anxiety that men experience around sexual performance that I've experienced through assisting men over these years, the stories I've heard, it's intense. And he doesn't feel like he can generally talk about that ever, anywhere, because he's not supposed to be in that experience, apparently. That's not what a strong, masculine, confident man is supposed to be dealing with. So he hides it. He stuffs it down. And he's the one that has to come back in contact with that in himself, if it's present. So with partner, without partner, practically there's some differences in what's available to practice with, but it's all about how he is imbibing himself, the permission that he's giving to himself to relax into exactly who he is in this moment. Maybe he's angry in this moment, but he's been told anger is bad and anger is dangerous. So hide it. Be polite. Be a nice guy. Right? Because that's how he was raised and distorted by his mother. So now he's sitting there like a pressure cooker, smiling. Right? But he wants to burn the whole building down. And if he holds it in, that's what can happen. So the process, again, of semen retention, it's just this little tool, but it calls him into feeling everything that is sitting in him as his energy starts to accumulate. So can he allow himself to be what he feels and to express what he feels? To be in his experiences fully, to not hide himself. And this, when I talk about these concepts, sometimes men are, maybe wondering, well, this is about semen retention. Why are you talking about these things? Well, as I said earlier, a man's capacity to hold himself in semen retention is directly related to the depth that he can hold himself and love himself and allow himself in every other area of his life. So whatever dysfunction he has, that will come up in sexual intimacy. And that's the gift of it, if we don't bypass it.
So, Chris, I'm interested in, so when the man embarks on this journey, does he just go for as long as he can without releasing? Or does he, give himself a couple of days and then work up to weeks, months?
Right. Thank you for repeating that question. So I always recommend that he listens to his own body's innate intelligence. Practically, he can support himself by staying away from visual stimulation or stimulation. I'm not sure if that's even a word. Visual stimulation that may be encouraging the movement of his sexual energy to go towards arousal and ejaculation. So to completely cut out, if he's watching porn, if he's looking at imagery, if he finds himself in thoughts fantasizing about sexual scenarios, to stop that, to let that go, to give himself the greatest opportunity in this. And then the more he can be in his body, the more he can start to understand his frequency of release. This will be dependent on how many years he's been on the planet, how indulgent he's been in the past, meaning how deficient he is in this moment, right? How much he's released, his diet, right? If he's eating a very dense diet, it's going to be different to if he's eating a very sattvic diet, maybe just more vegetables, vegan. I don't recommend that, but if he's in a phase of that, that'll be a different experience in his ability to retain. Also the season. Is it summer? Is it winter? Is it spring? All of these things have a direct impact on us because we're animals and we are completely dependent on nature and its seasons, lest we forget. So through the understanding of my body knows to stay present with his internal experience, but also allowing himself to challenge his current capacity. So if a man is used to ejaculating every 1 or 2 days, as an example of frequency, I would encourage him to, okay, do not choose in any capacity to ejaculate for at least 10 days to 2 weeks. If a man is used to, maybe ejaculating every 3 or 4 days, I would say, okay, attempt to be 3 weeks in your body without releasing, so on and so forth. And understanding that the body is very accustomed to creating a certain amount of fluid to release based on our frequency. So initially at the beginning, as a man is retaining, there can be a period of time where he just cannot get past 2 weeks in his own experience. He's like, even if I don't go, if I don't look at anything, I don't engage with myself sexually, I'll just fall asleep and I'll have a wet dream and I'll wake up and I will have ejaculated. Beautiful. The body is looking after you, right? The body is there and the body knows. Now, it's also a relationship dynamic of, hey, body, I'm changing this frequency. So the body takes a little bit of time. I call it cycles. The body, like a woman has her cycle monthly. As men, we have ejaculatory cycles. And it will take a few cycles of his commitment in order for his body to adjust. It's like, the little factory in his testicles are used to producing a certain amount to keep it going. That factory needs to get the memo, and all the workers need to start to cool off a little bit. They need to make less. I realize how unscientific what I'm saying may sound, but in my experience, it really does feel like that type of a relationship. The body starts to get used to it, and we start to absorb it in different ways. So obviously, if he's experiencing pain, then it may be good for him to allow himself to release if he's unable to meditate and breathe his way into removing the stagnation or to circulating the stagnation. As I'm hearing myself saying what I'm saying, I'm very aware that this is such a massive topic. It's a massive area with so many different pieces to it. And generally, I'm used to speaking for 3 to 4 hours in a workshop with all these pieces. So I'm realizing that I'm not going to be able to communicate everything that's necessary in this, hour call. But there's a lot of information out there if a man is wanting to go deeper into that. But never bypass his body. If he's in pain, honor himself in that process, but please always have the intention of, I am not going to ejaculate, especially in sex. If it happens by mistake, or if the body feels so backed up physically that it really wants to move, that's totally fine. And to not hate himself in that experience, to be loving with himself and to be compassionate with himself and to understand ejaculation is a normal part of our lives as men, and it's okay that it's happening. Because there can be a lot of very rigid approaches to this that I've seen cause physical damage to men. So you always have to listen to the body.
Yeah, that's a really important point. That I know I read somewhere that you had seen that it had caused physical damage and also maybe emotional damage. So before I forget that question, please, can we touch on that? What needs to be said about that? Because obviously that is a very important point.
So when I was referring to the physical damage, I was referring to a lot of the very common practices out there from certain teachers who teach very heady or very tension-based practices, pulling and pulsing and squeezing and pressing certain points in the perineum to stop the flow. If the train has already left the station, you got to let that train leave the station, right? Because interfering with that flow is potentially going to be damaging to a man's physicality. I'm relatively outspoken in the fact that I disagree with the majority of the practices out there that are being taught, that come from Taoist, very traditional Taoist practices of semen retention, that are kind of being compiled by research artists who don't really embody it so much, and then they're just sharing it as information. The issue with that is these practices originally were given to Taoist priests who are potentially eating very sattvic diets, very little density, meditating 12 hours a day, are in deep understanding of their internal system and their energy flow and their physicality, have built up over time a means of, in such a deeply nuanced way, relaxing and opening certain parts of their tissues, their sinews, their tendons, the prostate area. It's so nuanced. It's okay when a person is in that level of their own embodiment and knowing to start to bring in some of these subtle practices, which is what they originally were, subtle practices. But when we give those practices to people who are stuck in their head, who have not developed energetically in certain capacities or physically, there's going to be the proclivity to a lot of tension, to a lot of force, because we are ultimately a yang-based society, very heady, quite disassociated, distracted, and then we start to clench and push and pull, and it can be so heavy-handed. It can be so controlling. You know, when you back up a flame long enough, that flame is going to turn into an explosion. So I do not recommend any tension-based practices. That's why I released the 3-hour workshop recording on my website, to go really deeply into all the different factors of how, in my experience, I've in my own body felt what feels to be most supportive. And ultimately how a lot of the very traditional texts and practices, how it originally begun, which is in relaxation, which is denying nothing. Right? We see a lot of the neo-tantra stuff at the moment, and that can be very intense in certain places, very blowout-y in its depictions. But tantra and the original practice of it was deeply based in the ability to relax into everything, to allow everything, to not deny anything. And if the train starts to leave the station, you don't deny that. You don't fear that. But also, can you show up in a way where you're so sensitively attuned through relaxation, through allowance in your own body, that the train never gets going to begin with? So you never get to the point where you have to start to stop it. And again, just to very practically clarify, I do not recommend or condone any semen retention practices that stop the flow of it moving. What I recommend is, and what I teach is, how can we show up in a way where we're never getting that hot, right? Where we're consistently relaxing back into the flow. And we're continuously staying with it as it opens deeper, as it moves through the body of its own accord. We don't need to circulate anything. Energy knows how to circulate. That's what it's here to do. We don't need to try to circulate it for it. Yeah. So any controlling mechanics can potentially create some issues.
This is a great point, Chris. Thank you. Because when I put this out onto Facebook, I did ask men if they had any specific questions. And one question came in relating to this now, and I was going to say it anyway. So he said, what are some practical ways a man can circulate the energy that accumulates in his lower body when practicing semen retention? So can you go into any more depth about that, what you just started to talk about, please, Chris?
Living a life of existing deeply in the body means that no stagnation occurs. Stagnation occurs when we vacate a part of ourselves physically. So as long as the man is rooted and sitting in his pelvis and feeling his pelvis on a moment-to-moment basis to the best of his presence ability, wherever he happens to be at, which is always a work in progress, there will never be stagnation, because our attention brings more energy. It brings movement. So when he is aware and feeling his pelvis and all of the energy accumulating, his awareness creates more energy that supports the circulation of it naturally. So just by being with the fullness of what he's feeling down below, he'll start to feel that fullness. If he stays with it lovingly and in a relaxed manner, he'll feel that fullness starting to kind of percolate up. It'll start to come up. It'll start to dance in response to his presence. I always say to men that your sexual energy is feminine. Right? Your orgasmicness, your bliss, because it's fluid, it's water. There's yin building up in you, which is what we're generally so uncomfortable with. Right? There's a lot of different versions of how this appears in our life. So the more that a man can sit and be contained within his own self, without trying to rub it up against something externally to release it, if he can just be with it, the woman inside of him starts to bubble, it starts to boil. This is where alchemy happens, where he can just sit back and be loving and present with his own internal desires and his fullness and his energy, and watch her dance and watch her start to circulate in him. And then it opens his heart and he starts to feel more and more love coming up and down his spine in support of him. He will be loved and supported for the presence that he brings within himself. So that's it. That's ultimately it. And oftentimes people don't want to hear that because that requires too much accountability. It's like, no, but can you just give me 5 steps, like to move my legs this way and to jump up and down this way, to move it? It's like, no, be there. And you will learn it through feeling it, right? It's like, Chris, give me the technique for the woman. It's like, well, I don't know because I'm not with this woman. So you need to be there and feel her, and she will show you through every pore of her being, if you can listen to her. So my first understanding of the feminine and of a woman's experience actually came through my experience of myself internally. And all the parts that I was afraid to feel, all the parts that I had great difficulty staying present with, the fear of being overwhelmed by that bliss, by that orgasmicness, by that arousal. So this is his work. This is his work internally, and he starts to see everything outside of him can be navigated and understood inside of him first. And he can start to merge it with his outside world. He can start to apply his relationship to his felt sense to when he's sitting down and engaging with the woman in his life. Right? You can't listen to her, truly, deeply listen to her if you've created no space to listen to yourself. Because if you've never listened to yourself, what are you attempting to listen to? Right? So it always comes back to his relationship with himself. And Practically speaking, I'll give one thing. Qigong can be very beneficial. A daily practice of any form of Qigong that is circulating, that can be very supportive for moving backed up energy when it has started to back up, right? If it gets to a point where he has not been in himself and it is stuck and stagnant, then Qigong is a very supportive practice for that. And I also have a Qigong video course, very thorough, on my website that people can start a daily practice with immediately from. Very simple, very straightforward. But ultimately, it's in every moment of your day, can you be with yourself as a man? Can you be holding your own hand and never letting yourself go? Because why would you?
This is fascinating. I love how you speak of the energies, bringing in the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, which ultimately, as we've discussed many times in this series, each of us, men and women, are made up of, this the masculine and the feminine energies. So from what I understand here, what you're saying, Chris, is that for a man to be able to, let's say, be a good lover and a good partner and be able to feel a woman beside him, he has to be able to feel the woman inside him. And the way to do that is through his genitals, which ultimately for a man are the gateway to him feeling into his heart. Is that correct?
It's definitely a very profound one. It's definitely a very healing and beautiful way to begin that process. Absolutely. In general, being in all of himself, ultimately, right? Not just the genitals. I consistently refer to the genitals because of its connection with the heart, and more importantly, because of all of the fear, the shame, the tension, the bracing, the tightness that most men are carrying in the genitals, the perineum, the anus, that whole area up around the prostate. So generally speaking, embodiment, feeling, love, tenderness, healing is required in this lower part of his body. But the ultimate fullness is to be in every single cell of his body, to feel his own bliss of being alive. And ultimately, that's being a man who sets aside time, especially in his life, to honor being, just simply being, doing nothing, not even meditating, right? Not doing a meditation, just sitting or walking, creating space, absolute space for him to feel and remember what he is, because he's not what he's been conditioned to believe he is. And he doesn't have to go looking for what he is. That's the trick, right? We're told in society, you got to find who you are, find your purpose. You got to do everything to know your purpose. You are your purpose. So the most supportive thing you can do is actually stop seeking outwardly for anything and have enough space and time for you to just sit back into yourself and remember your own vibratory rate. Because once you feel that, there's no looking for anything anymore. That is all of the nourishment that he's looking for. And that goes for all of us, not just men. The only reason we're so unsettled and stressed and overwhelmed is because we're seeking the deep meaning of feeling our own aliveness. And the beauty, the simple beauty that's there when we feel our own existence so sensually. And I believe all our frantic moving and searching is because we're trying to get back to that place. But it's way more simple than what's being fed to us. But the simple is also the most confronting, because now we have to feel everything that's on the surface of that. right? It's like, if you take a pint of beer and there's froth on the top, right? The beer underneath, I can't believe I'm using beer as an analogy, but it's the Irish in me. So let's say the beer, the liquid, is the essence. The froth might be all the pain, the uncomfortability, but you just got to wait for it to dissolve a little bit. And often that's when people want to look for relief or release from that froth. They don't want to have to feel that first. They want to just get right to the essence. And anything that tells you, oh, you'll just go right to your essence without having to feel all of the pain that's sitting on top of that, run, because it's alive.
Yeah. No, the beer's a great analogy. And I wanted to get into this, this emotional aspect, because as you're alluding to,
I can hear you. I'm just plugging my laptop in.
okay, it's a huge part of it. So, a lot of men and women, of course, but we're talking about men, have been numbing themselves, not just sexually through pornography or, being in a headspace goal orientated, but through other substances, maybe alcohol, marijuana, different gambling, different distractions. So when they're embarking on this journey of semen retention, does all that other stuff like addictions or numbing substance use have to be stopped first before they can allow themselves to truly feel through this process of semen retention?
Ideally, yes. I mean, in a perfect world, in a perfect situation, anything that is possessing a person's energy and life force and consciousness, ideally that is stopped and that is removed. It will support the process in being a lot more direct. But also, we're very nuanced humans with a lot of different trauma patterns. And in my experience, it's generally never really that black and white. There's always a navigating of different aspects of one's season that they find themselves in. But ultimately, yes, in a perfect situation, drop the addictions, he said so casually. I'm not sure how easy that is, but it's all the same thing. It's all a part of the same experience, of the same energy of us being dominated and controlled and taken by this fiery yin deficiency that wants to move towards things to relieve the temporary pain. And ejaculation is no different to any other habitual habit that brings a moment of temporary relief followed by a potential crash and disempowerment.
Yeah, I'm guessing that, once a man feels this power within him through semen retention, he'd naturally unaligned with some of the external power sources that he'd been seeking to use in order to feel powerful.
It will definitely support the process in him being more resourced to face things that are very uncomfortable and challenging for him, because he'll have more access to himself. He'll have more energy. He'll have more life force available. And also what happens very, very quickly in this experience is when we experience ourselves showing up for ourselves in places that are very challenging or confronting, and we have a sense of succeeding in that, in really doing better than we've done with that, it brings up another support system of self-love, of confidence, of esteem, that will also give him more gusto when it comes to approaching things that are more challenging for him to face. But all of this ultimately comes down to one thing, and that is our fear of feeling what's inside of us. Everything that you've just brought up it all comes down to the fact that we are not taught or supported in feeling everything that is moving through us in this moment and having expression for it. When we hold on to stuff, it starts to make us sick. So any addictive tendency, any movement in our lives that is ultimately injurious to us and hurting us, that we keep perpetuating, that is the clearest sign of that fear of feeling, because it feels too much to feel that. We need relief. So we go to whatever we can find for immediate relief. And this runs through everything. So the more that we can sit with or move with, but just feel what is going on in us without defining ourselves and our worth and our value based on the types of emotions that are coming up in us or the past experiences we've had. The more we can do that, the healthier, the happier, the more empowered that we can all be. But all of it comes down to the fear of feeling. Ejaculation, it's the fear of the man feeling that energy in himself and all the tension that fear brings in, which means the energy can't circulate. So it backs up and is shot out of the body because it is nowhere to go because of the tension. And the other fear is just being overwhelmed by how beautiful and sensual and feminine and juicy this woman and her energy is. So there's a lot of fear of feeling many things. And it's the narrative around that really is required to shift.
Chris, as a man's going through this emotional journey, what would you advise them if they're feeling, say, a lot of anger and frustration and, what some people would consider negative emotions, and, they're a family man, and how do they go about living this journey and feeling this anger and frustration and overwhelm when they're surrounded by children and a wife, a partner?
Mm-hmm. Well, very consciously choosing to create time and space for himself in whatever way he can do that, whatever way he needs to get creative in his life to come up with ways to support this, whether that's just him and himself expressing in his own space, whether that's him and a therapist or a somatic body worker or someone there who's just being beside him and supporting him very presently, but getting creative with that and realizing that he's an animal. We're all animals and we work like animals. So when there's a charge, that charge requires discharge. It requires full cycle. Otherwise, it's stored in the body and it starts to fry our nervous system. So if he's dealing with anger and all these things, firstly, to realize anger is beautiful and powerful and potent when we can engage consciously with it and not allow that anger kind of fan the flame of our destructive egoic desires, because that's when the sabotaging comes in. That's when the destructive, masochistic type of behaviors will start to come in. But if we can meet the anger exactly in the simplicity of what it is, which is, wow, there's so much bellowing heat and energy and vitality that's swelling up in me right now, and expressing that very consciously, very clearly, whether it's, punching pillows or punching a punching bag or being in jujitsu and allowing that energy to be expressed martially in a way where it's safe and there's respect present and there's honor present, whether that's him going and lifting heavy shit to give that energy a form of expression. It's never about relieving himself from it. I never want a man to feel like he needs to relieve himself. We only want to relieve ourselves when we're in resistance to what we're feeling. We're like, I don't like it. I need it to go away because I don't want it to interfere with the space, because what will people think of me? That whole narrative is not of a health, right? It's not a healthy one. So for me, it's encouraging the man to be like, well, there's potency coming up in me right now, and let me honor and love it by getting creative about what are some ways that I can express this fully, even if society frowns upon it, right? Society is insane. So firstly, you don't have to do right by that. Doing right by your somatic system in a way where you are very conscious not to have it become destructive, right? And there's many different ways, whether it's just him screaming out in nature, whether it's him being in nature, whether it's him doing qigong or jumping up and down and moving his body. We've become so stiff and afraid to be dynamic because of what, well, people will think I'm crazy. We're not used to seeing alive humans. We're only used to seeing humans who are essentially one little milli breath away from death. Like we're barely hanging on based on our allowance to feel and breathe and express. So yes, you will look strange to people if you're choosing aliveness, but that's up to the individual to figure out what is priority for them. Is priority appeasing what everyone else thinks about me, which you can never do anyway? You'll all fail. Or is the priority to honor the way that I've been put together in a way where I mean no harm, but I'm willing to listen to my body and honor that, because that is what keeps me here. That is what is supporting my life.
Yeah, so good. Thank you, Chris. Like part of the title of this show is Deep Healing. So, what are the ultimate benefits a man can expect to see changes that come into his life once he goes through this journey?
He'll have more access to everything. Everything. To himself, to his drive, to his passion, to his joy, to his deep pain, to all of the trauma that he's been carrying around and not resolving. He'll have more access to intimacy with himself and the most beautiful intimacy with his partner. He'll start to be able to understand women from a felt sense, where he stops trying to understand her with his head, which you cannot do. It doesn't work that way. You need to feel her because everything is there. So it opens everything that he feels like may be of benefit to him, and everything that will ultimately hold him deeply accountable. That will start to be presented to him. But the benefits is he'll have more of himself, and he will no longer be dominated by his desires. And he also won't have to control his desires, because we only have to control something that we have no understanding of. He'll be in relation with his desires. He'll be in domain of. He'll be in constant conversation with that aspect of himself. It'll be a relationship, a functional relationship.
So good. I love this. And does the semen actually get healthier through this practice?
I have no clue scientifically. I try to just stay very clear on my direct experience and myself, ultimately, of this. I never want to go too deeply into trying to prop it up on scientific evidence, because ultimately science is just a beautiful experiment that continues to change every day. what we said was correct yesterday is absolutely not correct today, which we've seen in an intense way over the last number of years. So does the semen get healthier? I don't know what that really means. What I do know is that every cell of our bodies will be fed deeper, will be electrified deeper. In my individual experience and in the experience of seeing men go through this process, I cannot present a scientific paper on that. I also have no interest in presenting a scientific. I'm not nearly as intellectually intelligent enough. But what I say to men is just try it out, give it a try yourself. It will impact every single aspect of your life. It may be overwhelming and very confronting at first, and that's totally okay. And it's also okay to seek out the guidance of men who have been down this path before, or who have been on this path longer than you. This is the point of elders, I believe, that we lose the more that we continue in life. I don't know why to not do it. I don't understand reasons to not do it at this point in my life.
When I was, sort of researching it a bit, I also found quite a bit of men, or just with the energetics, that say you can't explain it on a physical level, but men practicing this are energetically more attractive to women. Is that your understanding as well, your experience? Can we sense, a man who is more grounded and in touch with himself on an energetic level?
Right. Well, you tell me as a woman, right? You're a woman. So when you come in contact with men who are practitioners of this, does that resonate in your system, or does it not? And there's no right or wrong answer to this.
I don't know which one. I mean, unless they're going to tell me. I mean, I presume you are. So obviously, I can sense a very grounded, beautiful masculine presence in you. But, I mean, it's not generally something that women are aware of unless, it's their intimate partner.
Right. So I want to be really careful answering this question, because on the internet, it's kind of a hook point that I've seen. There's a movement that's called NoFap, which is essentially semen retention. Maybe you've heard of it. And there is this running narrative that kind of supports the reason men or young men want to start doing semen retention, so they can be more attractive to women. I never want to support that being the reason why a man chooses to respect himself, because that's continuing to perpetuate the mother wound. How can I please mommy? How can I get mommy's attention and mommy's love? And a lot of men, all of their spiritual work is wrapped up in because women in their life have asked for it. So then he's doing it for the reflection and the validation of women in his life. And that is a dangerous path to take, and I would never recommend it. He should be doing it for himself first and foremost, and that is attractive to women naturally.
Yes.
That is inspiring, I presume, as a woman, to see a man who is disciplined and loving and respects himself and is grounded and has firm boundaries around what he's available for, and is honest and direct in his communication, and has a sense of backbone to him, right? There's an honoring, there's a code that he moves around his life based upon. I would assume, from knowing women to a certain degree, that that is an attractive experience. That is an inspiring experience for her to be in. So I'm kind of answering your question cautiously, but again, I wouldn't recommend that a man focuses on that.
This is great. And it is an important point because, as you said, there is sort of a selling point. It's just my, limited research that I did leading up into this conversation. So it is a great point to bring into awareness. And I loved your answer about that. Doing it for validation, external reasons defeats the purpose when it's a journey inwards, right? Which ultimately then will lead to better relations all round externally.
As I said initially, power is the frequency for us as men. That's what we're always wanting to demonstrate or have reflections of. But there is that very risky delusional path where we're doing things only to be reflected as powerful through the eyes of other people so that we can feel powerful. That is the dangerous path for him to go. And that is how so many men are raised, and why the man wants to become a doctor, why he wants to have the car, why he wants to have the money. It's all wrapped up in that. My way of working with and supporting men is to realize, well, can you sense that in yourself for yourself? Can you feel the potency coursing through you in an empty room without anyone having to tell you anything? Because just as quickly as someone says, I love you, right around the corner is someone who says, I hate you. We cannot lean on any of that because we'll live our lives attempting to appease it. And it's a whole inner process that is not an overnight thing. This is how I experience it, this is the consistent evolution and maturation of a man who is moving deeper and deeper into alignment with his life force, with his spirit, which is not pulling at anything. The spirit doesn't need any indication that it's powerful, right? So for me in my life, it's brought me to a place of deep humbleness. I know I may not sound that in certain situations based on the certainty with how I speak about certain things, but it's shown me more and more how I am not the power. And it's showing me more and more how so much of my behaviors earlier on in my life have been about trying to look like the power or be the power because I felt so powerless. Because the guidance I had received, the climate I grew up in, the education I was given, all of that was disempowering. And for me, through this process, I was able to drop, finally, I was able to drop the assumption that I have to try to be more powerful and to actually realize that the power is there all along. Mm-hmm. But the power is love. The power is my ability to be compassionate. The power is my ability to be kind, not to get something, right? Not to be nice to get something, but as an overflowing of, I respect and listen to myself and honor myself as deeply as I can in every single moment. I will make no apology for that to anybody. I owe nobody anything. I am here to be in alignment with me first and foremost, and the energy that has put me here. And once we start to click into that space, there's an overflowing that I experience that starts to happen. And that overflowing it's resourcefulness, it's love, it's kindness, it's presence, it's compassion, it's willingness, it's generosity. It's all these things that naturally spout out of one's own inner abundance in relation to themselves. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean stuff doesn't get challenging at times, and it doesn't mean stuff doesn't come up. There's no perfection in any of this. There's never a point of I finally arrived. I've arrived. I thought I've arrived there numerous times in my life, and every time life reminded me by putting me on my ass that was not the case. And it's an unraveling process of self-discovery. But it's all about going inwards. The self-discovery is just there. You just have to watch it unfold. And that is also inherently linked to semen retention.
We can start wrapping up now, Chris, but I have a question to ask relating to everything you just summed up so beautifully here. Is semen retention like, does a man have to incorporate this into his journey to arrive at, full integrated spiritual health? Like, is there any way around it, or it's a necessary step of the journey?
Initially, I would say it's necessary.
Okay.
To burn through certain places of conditioning. And then there's a huge other aspect, a more advanced, right? Because the deeper we go, the more nuanced everything gets, the less black and white everything is. So a lot of what I'm saying today is very black and white in terms of the practicalities of it. So initially, I would say, yes, it's very important that he faces this relationship in him at a certain level of depth, where things become a bit more, or a lot more nuanced and advanced. Everything I said starts to change.
Oh.
And this is not yet something that I have went into great detail publicly, because I'm aware of how easy it is for us as men to hear something and go, oh yeah, that's me, right? It's like, no, but it's not you yet. But we'll convince ourselves because we want to ejaculate.
Right.
And I've had this experience in my own life of literally being in the experience of lovemaking earlier on, and convincing myself in the moment of all the reasons why, I should just do that thing right now. And every time I moved in that, after, I'd be like, I tricked myself. Like I made excuses, and I manipulated myself. And there's a lot of that. We learn to manipulate ourselves so we can go to what we want to go to. So being very honest with yourself in the process, and catching yourself out as much as you can, that will be supportive to the process. And then eventually, when it gets to a more advanced stage for a man, he won't really be asking me questions anyway at that point.
Yeah.
He'll be so deep in it that he'll know, because I don't know what's right for him. I don't know what's right for anybody. My thing is, I'm going to keep pointing you to you, and your energy will show you. Here are some tools to keep going back into you. But I couldn't even begin to tell another man who's in that stage what he's supposed to do, because he knows. I don't.
Yeah, so good, so good. Okay, Chris, so me obviously not being a man and not going through this, what have I left out? That anything important that the men watching will be saying, why didn't she ask that question?
That's a good question. To not treat it like a competition, and to not keep score on himself. Sometimes I'll have men come to me and say, I'm on a 76-day streak. I'm like, what? I haven't touched myself in 76 days. I'm like, I'm on a streak and I don't want to lose it. That's no way to approach this at all. That's creating more issues. So to not be militant about it, to understand that you're a living, breathing, ebbing, flowing, feeling human, and to balance your discipline and your dedication, to balance that with absolute acceptance and compassion. That would be what I would want to share. And if it's okay with you, directing them to the course that I mentioned on my website.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I generally will never come on to any of these podcasts with the attempt to like try to sell something to someone. And that's not even the intention here. But I feel like when I have an hour or maybe a little bit more than an hour, it's not enough time for me to cover everything that I've covered in the past. And I've uploaded a 3-hour workshop, which I held maybe about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And to this point, it's the most concise offering that I have for men in this area. And I've really heard that it's deeply shifted a man's whole practice of this and how he's relating with it. So I'm saying so much more and transmitting so much more in that men's workshop. So for any men who are interested, I would always, always, always direct the man to like go there and start there, and then try it out for yourself. And also, if you're looking for an approach that is in no way based on tension practices, that's what I'm offering. So yeah,
where can they find you, Chris? What's your website? And I'll put the links below, but just for you to say it, please.
Sure. So the website is awakenedintent.com. And my Instagram, I think I always mix this up in my head.
I've got the link, yeah.
Chris Bale Awakened is my Instagram.
Oh, so good. One last question that's popped up is, how can us women help any men in our lives that are going through this?
By not trying to help any men in your life who are going through more work and to completely prioritize bringing woman to him. Right? That's how you support him. Because if she's checked out, if she's rigid, if she's not in her body, if she's caught in her head, if she's not willing to feel, if she's also rushing, now she's supporting his inability and his challenge to actually maintain and to hold himself. So doing everything that she can possibly do in her own life to love, support, and to show up in herself as juicily as possible, which is the other side of my work that I do and represent when I work and speak directly to women. Even though I'm not a woman, women have taught me so much through the process of being there and listening and hearing her, that now I just kind of function more like a messenger and relaying it in my own way. But to really honor herself and to not treat him like a child, to not go, oh, I have to like help him in his, no, stay out of his process. You don't need to mother him. You love him by showing up in the fullness of your own healthy womanhood, where you're constantly burning and loving through any ounces of distrust, disdain, hatred, criticism that you have towards men and the masculine. That's the biggest thing I see with women that I work with. They come to me wanting to meet their man, calling in their man, but there's such a deep level of disdain that she's carrying that is also pushing him away at the same time. So these points go quite deep. So you love and support him by loving and supporting yourself in loving and supporting in life.
Oh, and yeah, that's so important. Thank you so much for clarifying that, Chris. Wow, such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for reconnecting and all this amazing information. I hope for the men out there and for the women, you know, we've got a whole new level of understanding of this journey, which just sounds so powerful and such a divine alchemy of reconnection for the male. So thank you, Chris. Any final words?
Well, I so enjoy and appreciate your energy and You as an individual is the reason that I choose to come on here and have these conversations, because I ultimately just very much enjoy the energy that you bring. So thank you for your openness, and also for your championing of men, and being willing to spend your time and your life force and all of your creative essence in holding all of these interviews and speaking with all of these men and putting all of this out there. I mean, what a beautiful ode to men and to masculinity. So that's another part of it that I'm deeply appreciative. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chris. So wonderful. Enjoy the rest of your day, and everyone, please check out Chris's website. He's got some amazing blogs on there that you can look at, and his workshops and his mentorship and energy work. You know, so much beautiful information on there. And I know you're not much on, or you're not on Facebook anymore, you're on Instagram, which I'm not. I'm only on Facebook. Keeps me.
Well, I'm not on any of them,
Oh,
but luckily I'm very supported in that by the people who support me. So yes.
All right, everyone, thanks for watching. If you could like, share, subscribe, and I'll be back in a while with another episode of Man Speak. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you.